Hamas attacks on Israel. What does the Quran say about them? Are they justifiable if we were to look at this matter from the Quranic perspective? Assalamu alaikum. I'm Moses, and today I would like to talk about this topic that obviously is something that we are all reading, hearing about all the time. Let me start with something that was said by my namesake in the Quran. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. My Lord, put my being self at peace for me, and ease provision my task for me, and untie the knot from my talk, so they can understand my speech. I think the first thing that we should do whenever we talk about a complex topic such as this is to make sure we're talking and we're using the same terms consistently the right way. And as Wittgenstein said, elementary propositions consist of names. Something as important as names is actually very important. Something quite trivial, I should have said, that is actually quite very prominent. As Allah said in the Quran, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, and He taught Adam, mankind, the names, labels of it all. So I genuinely believe that if we are to tackle a topic such as this, that is extremely complex, it has got multiple perspectives, it's got multiple vantage points, it's got people with very vested interests, we will never be able to come to a discussion if we are all using language in the way it's not meant to be used, or we are misusing the terms to our own advantage. Hence, I will try and set a few terms clear before we try and tackle the question of today's talk, which is, did what Hamas did, is that action justifiable according to the Quran or not? As I said, let's get some of those terms basically very right from the beginning. Hamas is not the Palestinian people. It is a powerful subset of them, but it is not the same. Hamas does not speak on behalf of the Palestinian people. It is a subset of them. Similarly, the Israeli regime, the army, is not the Israeli people. It is a very powerful subset of it, but it does not stand. There's no one-to-one equivalence between the two necessarily. Third point, a dead baby is just that. A dead baby is not Palestinian. A dead baby is not Jewish. The Quran's Muslim is a peace-loving person who submits to Allah's system. That is, he spreads peace. He believes in tranquility. He believes in prosperity. He believes in coexistence where different peoples of different thoughts live together in peace, in harmony. The Quran's kafir, on the other side, is someone who willingly chooses to reject the system of Allah. The Quran's Islam is the very same Islam taught by all prophets and followed by Nabi Muhammad as well. By the way, at the very bottom, if you're seeing it now, I am talking live, so assalamu alaikum to all those who are watching me right now and those who will watch me later. At the very bottom, you will see a little index. And in that index, I like to kind of give you a visual indication of how far we have gone into this talk. So as you can see, what I've got highlighted there is the terms. Next, we'll be looking at, well, how do we separate the wood for the trees before we get to the Quranic principles, and then look at this particular topic that I think we should be talking about. Few reminders. The Quran, the Mus'haf, we have to be very honest, whether somebody likes this or not. It does not talk about Al-Quds, or Jerusalem, or Yerushalayim, or the Dajjal, or the second coming of Masih, or Al-Bayt al-Maqdis, or a certain mosque in Al-Quds. All of these, whatever they are, they've got nothing to do with the Quran. Allah, the creator of it all, the master of the universe, the originator of it all, did not and does not put any one race, Jewish, Arab, Pakistani, American, over the others. Thirdly, I think it's a great tragedy that we continue to misappropriate the Quranic terms, like shaheed, and we give them a different meaning. We end up twisting not just the connotations, but through these language games, we end up confusing people. We end up appropriating terms from a text towards a direction where it ends up meaning something completely different. I've got an example screenshot on the right-hand side. It's something I put up on the YouTube page before as well. This is a screenshot from Al Jazeera Arabic, and what they're talking about there, and I've highlighted this, is the number of dead on the Palestinian side and the number of dead on the Israeli side. At the very bottom, they got the numbers for the injured people. So for the injured, the terms used are al-jarha al-Filistiniyun, al-jarha al-Israeliyun. They got the numbers in there. But they've done something really strange, something really fascinating on the top when they talk about the dead. When they talk about the Palestinians, they say al-shuhada al-Filistiniyun. When they talk about the dead on the Israeli side, they say al-qatla al-Israeliyun. So straight away, what we are seeing is, let's be honest, because I think today, for those who are watching now and those who watch later, I think the first thing we should do is be honest to ourselves. Al Jazeera is doing hypocrisy here. When you've got an inherent bias towards people of a certain kind, and you call the dead of a certain people to be martyrs, but you call the dead of a different race to be just the dead, then you are discriminating between them. And then if you put a religious flavoring on top, what you end up with is a concoction which I believe does not serve anybody's purpose but those who want more warfare on this earth. So ash-shuhada of the Quran has got nothing to do with what we call today as a victim of bombardment by any one side against the other. On that note, I personally would like to acknowledge my personal inherent biases. Yeah, and what I mean by that is that being brought up the way I was in the country with the culture and all the religious trappings that I had, I find it very hard sometimes to see things from a non-Palestinian perspective. I am pro-Palestinian by default because of how I was brought up. That is an inherent bias that I suffer from, but at least I acknowledge it. What I would like us all, when we watch today or down the track or discuss it or critique it, is to acknowledge where we come from and then see how, despite all of that, how much honesty we can show when we look at a topic as complex as this. And that is a reason why, and I'll talk about this more, I have specifically decided to talk about Hamas and not Israel or anybody else's perspective, because we should begin a critique from home. So in the comments, I can see Brother Hamza Yusuf, Imrana, MT, Tsunami, and all those who are watching. Assalamu alaikum to all of you once more as well. Yes, an impromptu talk. And I thought I was quite surprised that we did not see much talk about this topic. I kept waiting that there'll be talks from those who follow the Quran, and we'll be talking about this burning issue. But because it didn't, I thought I had to do my own part. Let's keep moving. I also think before we get to this matter, or before we open the Quran, we should open our eyes. We should acknowledge the world we live in. These battles that we're seeing play out in front of us, this particular instance where Hamas basically went out, invaded those around them, these people, the Hamas and Israeli regime, they are not the designers of this ongoing war. They did not start it. They're not the source of it. They're mere pawns. They are actors that are on this particular ground, and they're doing what they're doing, but they're not the ones who are ultimately responsible. This is a key reality we should never forget. People long dead, they drew up random lines on the maps to suit the political reasons, and that's where we ended up being. Powerful people do steer the narrative. They maintain the status quo, and they want this thing to stay for their own purposes. And by the way, I'm only saying these things out to set the scene. I'm trying to very explicitly stick to what I think is our universal truths that all parties from all sides of this debate will agree on, that I'm not saying anything that would allow us to just get stuck in the weeds and not look at the bigger picture. So I'm just trying to make sure that before we hone in on the Quran, derive some principles from the Quran, and then apply them on this particular matter of, well, whether what Hamas did is justifiable or not. I want to make sure we don't forget the bigger picture. So having said that all, this particular event, that of Hamas attacking Israel, all of those thousands of people who died as a result of that, it did not happen in a vacuum. Let's just agree on this very simple fact. Also, and something I'll be talking about as we go on, even though I am talking about this one particular event, I would like to say that the Quranic principles that I'd like us to discuss today, they apply on all of the other parties in this conflict as well, and specifically those behind the scenes who are sustaining them, who are the real beneficiaries from this to continue. Now, few facts, and again, I'm trying to be as academically unbiased as much as I can be, despite my inherent biases. Historically, overall, relations between Jews and Muslims have been largely cordial. Despite the past 70 odd years, things have been good. We also have to acknowledge that there were a lot of Arab and Turkish mistakes, are largely the two main parties, which directly led to the creation of the modern state of Israel. I think it's a simple fact. What is quite ironic, though, is that the state of Israel's existence is founded on the premise of racial supremacy, which is quite ironic if you look at how they were the ones suffering from concepts of racial supremacy that were against them. So once they were the recipients of discrimination against them, and now they are the ones invoking this towards a certain people. Through the past 74 odd years, I have no shame in admitting that all sides, no matter how you slice and dice them, religious, linguistic, racial, they have all done wrongs. This is the simple fact. Muslim nations, we have to be honest. This is the part that when we talk about the Quranic principles, there's something we will pick up there as well. But we, as members of these Muslim nations, who blame Israel at times for doing these things, our nations have done the very same thing against our own peoples. But we don't always find ourselves standing up and critiquing our governments. So what we blame others for, as in Israel for, we have been doing this, and we are doing this right now to our own people as well. We should be honest. We should admit this. We have got false stories, many false stories, that have been attributed to Prophet Muhammad, which have resulted in lingering, festering hatred of a certain race, the Jews. Let's be honest about it. There's plenty of literature out there for anybody who wishes to bring it up that talks and promotes, in the Quranic sense, misusing the Quran and all this based upon this made-up literature that goes along and gets paraded as Islam, all this hatred against a group. And what does that do? That basically means that a lot of Arabs, Palestinians, Muslims, will never accept the right of Israel to coexist peacefully, no matter what the state of these temporary peace treaties might be. This tatbi'at, as they say in Arabic, between say Morocco and Israel, or UAE and Israel, they will continue to lash out at Israel. These are the simple facts. My last page on the slides, and after this we'll talk about the Quran. Both sides have access to tools of propaganda. Yeah, one has got more than the other. I think it's quite obvious which side I'm talking about. Similarly, both sides have got means of destruction, one disproportionately more than the other. Also, this is the third point. I think is a universal point. I'm not naming names here, but it's a universal fact. Whenever a people have been occupied, they have lashed out. This is historical truth. Whether we agree or disagree with the certain modes of that expression, that can be debated. Some points and some certain expressions can be empathized with. But I think what we're talking about is that this concept of resistance by people who feel they're oppressed, that they've been kicked out of their own land, that is a natural consequence of what we expect to find in a situation like this. So this is kind of just setting the scene for where we sit in. I'm going to stop here, not talk anything more about politics or the bigger picture or which party did this or did that, because I don't want us to get stuck in the weeds. I'm just setting the scene from the very beginning, once we did the terms, seeing the wood for the trees, to make sure that when we talk about the Quranic principles, we have got our ducks in a row, as they say. Just having a quick look at the comments, and I'm going to continue. Why do I use the Quran? For those who haven't watched me before, or those who might be asking right now, well, why is this guy using the Quran? Well, I believe, this is my firm belief, that the Quran does have something quite significant for the human race, and it itself makes certain claims about itself. For example, when it says, وَنَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَهُدًى وَرَحْمَةً وَبُشْرًى لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ, that we have revealed this book as an explanation of all things and guidance and mercy for those who are peace lovers. So when this book is making a claim like that, and as we'll see, it makes these claims in many different forms, then it behooves us to look at this book and see whether there are principles we can derive from it to look at this really complex topic. And there's one particular incident that if we will try and zoom in on and see if there are principles that we can apply to not only unpack what that side did and judge whether it is an act that is justifiable whether it's an act that can be redeemed, whether it's an act that we should be celebrating, or it's an act that we should be okay with. So that is the key reason why I do use the Quran throughout this channel, but in this particular video, we are going to take this book according to its claims and see whether this actually will hold or not. The Quran is very clear, as I said before. It says not just that this is a book of guidance, but it says you have to warn and guide with it. كتاب أنزل إليك فلا يكن في صدرك حرج منه لتنذر به وذكرى للمؤمنين. Allah ordered a book revealed to you all, every single one. So let there be no anxiety in your core because of it. You are to warn with it. لتنذر به. Now this you that's being talked about is not just the first recipient of the Quran. It's not just a certain religious scholar. It's not a certain person who says the Shahadatain and is traditionally known to be a Muslim. It is for anybody who wants peace, because the Quran is not for a certain race or a certain religion. The Quran is for an-nas, it's for people. It is for all types of people. So if there's anybody who wants to take guidance, Quran welcomes him, her to come, take the Quran and warn with it. The Quran is guidance. We are to use it. Quran is explicit that it has parables. It has parables, examples for us, for all types of peoples, for all types of situations. That is a very bold claim. وَلَقَدْ صَرَّفْنَا لِلنَّاسِ. And we have dispatched to the people فِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ, in this Quran, مِنْ كُلِّ مَثَلٍ, from all types of examples. فَأَبَى أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ إِلَّا كُفُورًا. But most of the people refuse to be anything but rejecters. I think there's quite ironic, and I'm not trying to pick a side here, but I think it's quite ironic that in Quran, the Nabi Musa, who is held as an example of someone who fought against discrimination, who fought for the rights for his people that we claim to be or understand to be his people, they are doing the same as was being done by the oppressors before. So it's history kind of repeating itself. It is an example. It is an example. It's a parable for us. Allah says that we are to take these guidelines and stick to them. وَاذْكُرْنَا مَا يُتْلَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنْ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ لَطِيفًا خَبِيرًا. Keep in memory. This is a general order, and I'm not going to go into the details of this particular surah, but this is an order that is not just specific to one group of people that no longer matter to us, but applies to all of us. Keep in memory. وَاذْكُرْنَا مَا يُتْلَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنْ. Keep in memory all that is followed, mentioned in your schools of understanding, from Allah's signs and the wisdom. Allah is sublime, ever aware. Our buyut, our modes, receptacles of understanding, the way we look at the world, we pass the reality, we make sense of all that is around us, it must adhere to, it should be refreshed by, must be molded by Allah's code. That is one of those fundamental points that I think we, as the followers of this book who want to have peace on earth, should never, ever forget. In other words, what we're really being told by the Quran here is that no matter what happens, what people say around you, no matter what the public, as they say, what the feel on the street might be, or the fervor is around you, or what hashtags have just suddenly gone in vogue, or how many people are talking about this, or what video have gone viral, or what one particular incident or something really terrible happened to this one particular child, how much that plays on you, etc., etc. Take a step back. Make sure that when you perceive things, when you judge, when you create this buyut, that you're making sure that they're being guided by the dhikr of Allah. You're not straying from what you should be doing. What we should do, as per this Quran, is to come to Allah's rope, Allah's law. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ وَإِلَى الرَّسُولِ رَأَيْتَ الْمُنَافِقِينَ يَصُدُّونَ عَنْكَ صُدُودًا. If they are told, come to what Allah has sent down and to the Rasul, see the hypocrites turning away from you strongly. I think it's quite a simple message, end of the day. Again, per this book, we're just setting the scene here, really. The call is made that if there is something you need to refer to Allah and His Rasul, the Risala that we have. We are to follow His guidelines. Having said that point, as a reminder for those Muslims who maybe look at this book and say, Yeah, it's beautiful. I like to read it, with a beautiful voice. I like to listen to it. I go do the Taraweeh every year. And I listen to the Quran once or twice, etc., etc. But yeah, I don't think it's quite necessary, or it doesn't really apply to this world. There was a lesson for them. For those who are not Muslims, whether you're a Jew who has somehow managed to find your way onto this video, whether you're Zionist, whether you're one of those Christians who hate the Zionist state but want it to be there so the Messiah can come back and save all of a certain group of people, whether you're a Hindu watching it, Quran is explicit in its claims to be understandable and followable by all people. So that really section was for all of us, really, from that perspective. So now that Quran has made its point very clear and we've kind of covered it, let's see how does the Quran offer, what ways the Quran offers us to try and come up with a framework to understand these particular problem areas. And if we were to be in this situation, how should people be dealing with each other? So Allah says that we are to argue and invite in the best way. It's the ayah says, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'izah al hasanah wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan." Invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good advice, and debate with them in the most dignified manner. It's a key guiding principle that we must never forget. This example here, one of the examples that Quran offers us, I think it's one of the most beautiful examples that I've ever read throughout the Quran. I think it's extremely thought-provoking. It calls to action all of our biases. It makes us rethink of how we understand the world, how we look at associations that are based on piety or on doing good versus their counterparts. What does Allah say? He says, "Alam tara kayfa daraballah mathalan kalimatan tayyibatan ka shajaratin tayyiba asluha thabit wa far'uha fis sama." Do you not ponder how Allah presents a parable? A good word is like a good tree structure. Its root base is firm, and its branches, offshoots are in the sky heights. What are we getting out of this? We are to construct a fruitful, positive infrastructure, a lattice work that gives out as its result sweet fruit. We are not to create a cycle of destruction, shajara khabitha, which comes up in, I think, the next two ayat after this particular ayah. We are to grow good, positive networks and cycles, not to be in the opposite state. We are to move away from cesspools. وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. The servants of the Rahman are those who walk the earth in humility, and when the ignorant address them, they say peace. خُذُ الْعَفْوَ وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ, says the Quran in another ayah. Be tolerant and command with what's known to be right, and avoid the ignorant. What are we taking away from it? There sometimes is no reasoning with those who do not wish to do so. That is something we will always encounter. We are to move on, but we are not to let that. We are to be lenient. We are to be flexible. And again, this is what we're looking at. Quite ironic that this is the advice given to Nabi Musa for his people and how he should behave, how he should conduct himself. فَقُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرُ أَوْ يَخْشَىٰ. But speak to him with lenience, in a soft manner, in a gentle manner, where you got flexibility, so that he will remember or have fear. So an advice given to Nabi Musa for his people is just as much applicable to those who might find themselves today against Nabi Musa's people. We are to do the Hajj. We are to do the debate, the discussion. And no, the Hajj of the Quran is not going to a specific place, going around a stone building seven times in a specific manner. It is not about stoning pillars of stone with stone a specific number of times. This is not the Hajj of the Quran, and I've got a video for those who might want to watch it. But a reminder here: وَأَذِّن فِي النَّاسِ بِالْحَجِّ, and proclaim, call, command to you, command to me, proclaim unto people with the argument discussion. The Quranic Hajj, this is the way of Nabi Ibrahim, that Nabi Muhammad followed, arguing with reason and logic. Qisas, one of the extremely misunderstood terms of the Quran. There's something that I'd like to talk about more as time goes on. But in short, what is the qisas? وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاةٌ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. There is life, nourishment for you in thoroughly investigating matters. Al-Qisas, thoroughly investigating matters. O people of understanding, so that you be Allah conscious. We are not to jump to conclusions. We are not to give in to rash thinking. We are to investigate the matter in front of us thoroughly, properly, academically, without emotion, before we take a particular course of action that may or may not be right. We are not to follow the wrong people. وَلَا تُطِعِ الْكَافِرِينَ وَالْمُنَافِقِينَ وَدَعْ أَذَاهُمْ وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ وَكَفَى بِاللَّهِ وَكِيلًا. And do not obey the willful rejectors and the hypocrites, and disregard their minor harmful acts towards you, and rely on commission Allah, His system. We should be very careful in who we hang out with, who we choose to follow, whether it's the majority, whether it's people we know are rejectors of righteousness, of things that are good, or people who are hypocrites. We are meant to not follow them. We are meant, as we just saw in the ayah before, to do the al-qisas, make sure that we understand what we are doing. We are to strive for Allah's deen, jihad. And no, jihad does not specifically mean to go and bomb someone or to take out your sword and start killing people with it. That is not the jihad of the Quran. Jihad, to strive. And for those who speak, Arabic today, yajhad is to strive for something, or jiddu jihad, as we say in Urdu, is to go and struggle for something as well. It does not necessarily mean to go and do a bloody brawl with somebody. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu ittaqullah wabtaghu ilayhi alwasilah wajahidu fi sabilih la'allakum tuflihun. O you who have believed, be conscious of Allah and seek the means of approach to Him and strive in His cause so that you succeed. Strive. Al-Jihad of the Quran, as we just saw before, if we don't usurp the terms and twist them out of their meanings from the way the Quran uses them, it does not mean a holy war. That is not what the Quran is talking about. Whatever we might want to call it today, whether these people from the Hamas, whatever they are calling it, when they say this is al-Jihad as ordained by Allah, this is a holy war, be very careful. That is not what the Quran is talking about. We are to struggle, qital, qatl. We are to struggle, but we are not to cross the limit. Now, for those who do speak Urdu, there is a video on the channel in which we have thoroughly covered the concept of qatl in the Quran. It does not mean to kill, not in my understanding or fahm of the Quran. It is to change the state of affairs from one to the other. وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and fight to change the state of affairs in the cause of Allah. الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا. Those who oppose you, but do not, even then, do not commit aggression or excess. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Allah does not love the aggressors. And same, in the same pattern. وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, fight to change the state of affairs in the cause of Allah. وَعَلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. By changing the starting state of one thing to another, hopefully from a wrong state to a right one, we are doing the qital of the Al-Quran to have peace on the earth. That is the Al-Qital. But even when we do that, even when we are trying to force that change, we are meant to keep and adhere to higher principles. We're not to go beyond the limits. We're not meant to commit aggression. We're not meant to be committing excesses. And this ayah here. Now, some would argue that this specifically talks about the Bani Israel. And I'm not going to go into detail on who those people are from a Quranic perspective, but the principle we take away is something that's universal, applies to everybody. We are to save lives, and we're not to waste them. There's a certain golden principle the Quran gives us. من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا. Whoever forcibly changes a person's state, unless it's for a nafs or corruption, It is as if he did so to the whole of mankind. وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا, and whoever saves, revives it, فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. It is as if he saved, revived the whole of mankind. A golden principle. Don't force yourself onto others. Focus on reviving, resuscitating, re-nourishing. We are to be just. Whenever we look at a matter like this, or any other complex matter, we have to be as honest as we can, even if that is against our own interests. وَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ وَالْمِيزَانَ بِالْقِسْطِ لَا نُكَلِّفُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعْدِلُوا وَلَوْ كَانَ ذَا قُرْبَى. I just read this little portion in this translation. Give honestly full measure and weight equitably. Do not burden a person beyond his capacity. When you speak, you must observe justice, even if against a close one. Even if against a close one. The Quranic concepts of mizan and kail, they are far beyond just weighing instruments that were used in the archaic times for measuring and weighing potatoes and onions on those iron scales. It is bigger than that. It's putting things in the right way, giving the rightful their due, ensuring meritocracy in a society, doing things the way they're meant to be. There is a race that the Quran promotes that is unfortunately not part of today's Olympics. And that race is to do good, is to compete with each other in doing good. وَلِكُلٍّ وِجْهَةٌ هُوَ مُوَلِّيهَا فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. To each is a direction that he will take, so you shall race towards good deeds. We are to do good deeds, as many of them, as much of them as possible, before others. One race the Quran definitely promotes. This one here might trigger a few people, but Allah is extremely clear. We, as humans, are not to create religious totems and attribute them to Allah. وَلَا تَقُولُوا, and don't declare, لِمَا تَصِفُوا أَلْسِنَتُكُمْ الْكَذِبَ هَذَا حَلَالٌ وَهَذَا حَرَامٌ لِتَفْتَرُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ الْكَذِبَ إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَفْتَرُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ الْكَذِبَ لَا يُفْلِحُونَ. You shall not invent lies about Allah by attributing lies with your tongue, saying, this is lawful and that is forbidden. Those who invent lies about Allah will not succeed. There's a golden, not just a golden principle, but there's a law that Allah tells us, and this is as black and white as it gets. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَفْتَرُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ الْكَذِبَ. Those who make up a lie in the name of Allah, as in this particular action is halal by Allah, or is masmuh by Allah, this is a favorite thing by Allah, or that these certain people are not loved by Allah, or this particular action is haram. Whoever makes that up, whoever, la yuflihun, they will not succeed. They will not succeed. We are not to sanctify anything, not to create these religious totems. We're not to make something like coexistence with other people haram, and then attribute that to Allah. There will be many people today, there will be many people who will watch this tomorrow, and to a certain extent that this list includes me as well, where we don't have knowledge of a certain topic. And that is okay. But what the Quran does give us is a certain principle to follow, which is وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. Do not uphold what you have no knowledge for. For the hearing, eyesight, and mind, all these are held responsible for that. What do I take away from this? What do I understand from this as a principle for us to apply in this particular matter? We're not meant to outsource our emotion, anger, to others if we don't have knowledge of a specific matter. Just because everybody else around me is really stirred by a certain event, or something really terrible has happened, I don't really understand the bigger picture. I don't know all of the various angles that come into play, but because everybody is really disturbed, I feel I should feel the same, and I let myself be swept up by that. That is not correct. By not researching something, but not knowing, deciding not to know about a particular topic, but still taking an action either which way, that is me standing and doing a certain act without proper knowledge. So if you don't know something, we should not be making any decisions either which way. That is I think it's a very fair ask by the Quran. For those who would say, well, it is impossible for us to come to grapple with something like this? Well, this is an extremely complex topic. There's so many things to look at, so many factors and coefficients and other points and points of views and history and religion, and these guys have a claim, etc., etc. How are you ever going to find out? We'll never get to a perfect answer. Or some might say there is some of the Quranic ayat that I read, I don't really understand. So, maybe I should not really even try. Or this guy, Musa, today, talking about this topic, he's got a certain few ayat of the Quran, and I actually don't quite agree with some of the interpretations that he has with some of the ayat. He's not perfect. Well, what are we meant to do? What are we meant to do? Are we meant to just stop and say, well, I tried, couldn't quite get there, I'm just going to move on? No, perfection is not the goal. الذين يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه أولئك الذين هداهم الله وأولئك هم أولو الألباب. The ones who listen to the word, then follow the best of it. فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَ. I read something of the Quran. Even if I don't understand every single thing about a particular ayah, I got the gist of what was being talked about there to the best of my limited ability. And I took the meaning. And I looked at the whole, and I confirmed that this is in accordance with what the other ayat of the Quran say. This is what Allah has been repeating in other examples throughout the Mus'haf as well. And based upon that, to my limited ability, I follow the best of it. Then I am following the example, I'm following the command of Allah here. And that is a principle that I'm taking in here when we look at this particular matter. We may not be perfect in understanding application of this particular matter, but we still have to do the best to our abilities if we are to grapple and make a judgment on this particular matter. There's a law of requital. I think it's a universal principle. As you sow, so shall you reap. And Allah, he talks about the rules that He has made up. He mentions that. وَالَّذِينَ كَسَبُوا وَسَيِّئَاتٍ جَزَاءُ سَيِّئَةٍ بِمِثْلِهَا وَتَرْهَقُهُمْ ذِلَّةٌ. As for those who have earned wrong deeds, a reward consequence of similar wrong, an ignominy will cover them. Something we should remember, because on the next over few slides, we'll talk about these universal rules that Allah has set that we have to take into account when we construct this initial framework to look at this particular incident. Allah's Sunnah that He mentions quite a lot of times in the Quran is eternal, it's unchanging, it applies to peoples and to nations. For example, in this particular section, I've got two ayats in here. The first one, istikbaran fil ard wa makra sayyi wa la yahiqul makru sayyi'u illa bi ahli. Arrogance on earth and evil scheming. The evil schemes only backfire on those who scheme them. فَهَلْ يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَّا سُنَّةَ الْأَوَّلِينَ فَلَنْ تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا وَلَنْ تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَحْوِيلًا. Were they expecting anything different from the sunnah used in the people of the past? You will not find any change in Allah's sunnah. The next ayah, سُنَّةَ اللَّهِ فِي الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِ وَلَنْ تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. This is the way of Allah with those who have passed away before, and you will not find any change in the way of Allah. What is the takeaway from this? It is a golden rule, it's an eternal rule. This is sunnah of Allah, the only sunnah that is really applicable to us as followers of the Quran. No other sunnah matters, no other sunnah. There's only one sunnah in the Mus'haf that was given to us by Nabi Muhammad. All people, nations, associations, they rise, companies, and fall according to the rules of consequences set by Allah. Whoever follows the principles, the guidelines given by Allah for success succeeds. Anybody who doesn't. This is a very simple state of affairs. It's something that we have seen throughout our history, regardless of religion, culture, people. It's something that we see right now, and as per what Allah is saying, we will never find this sunnah ever changing. Consequences based on what you do. Wheel of time, just to reiterate this point, and before we kind of wrap up the Quranic ayat and try and summarize it, I call it the wheel of time. And Allah is reiterating this point when we look at this particular section. وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمْ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُمْ مُؤْمِنِينَ. Do not waver, do not feel remorse. You are, this is a guarantee, you are the superior ones if you are peacekeepers. وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. If you were to be peacekeepers, if you were actively trying to spread amn in your societies, you are the superior ones. This is, as an example, the Quran is replete with them. If you did this, this is what will happen. If this is not happening to us, the question that becomes is, are we in the mu'minin category? I'll continue. إِن يَمْسَسْكُمْ قَرْحٌ فَقَدْ مَسَّ الْقَوْمَ قَرْحٌ مِثْلُهُ وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And if a wound afflicts you, a similar wound has afflicted the others. Such times we alternate between the people. وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. So that Allah knows those who spread peace. And the ayah goes on from there. Good and bad times come for all people, all nations. Change is the constant. Some days or some periods favor certain nations in a certain part of the evolution. Like as we saw, let's pick the Abbasid region, the golden period of Islam, as we call it. That golden period has shifted to another nation. This will shift to somebody else down the track. And even in the ayah just before, we have an example of a sign of who the nation will be. In kuntum mu'minin, then wa antumul a'laun. If you were those who were actively spreading amn in your societies, then you are the ones who have superiority. Quran mentions these examples over and over. The wheel of time, it does come, it does move things around, but it moves them according to those who understand these patterns and work towards them. Just having a look at the question there from Brother Hamza. Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to. For those who are asking this question, who have asked this question, yeah, do share these videos. I don't mind. If you think this, if you want to share these videos on your channel or whatever, that's fine. This is a message of Allah. This is nothing personal. So do feel free. I'm having a quick look at the comments, and people asking about this topic in Urdu and Hindi. Maybe one day. But for now, let's continue. I'll now try and summarize based upon these very few ayat that I took, and try and come up with a framework of understanding of what we should be doing. And as I said before in the very beginning as well, the Quran is full of what we should and shouldn't do. If I were more knowledgeable, then I would have spent more time and collected a lot more of the ayat and put up all those principles, way more than what I've got in here. But again, what I'm trying to show here is that even the little that I've got here, as per the Quranic instructions we just got before, is enough for us to begin to create a framework to judge not just this one particular incident, but look at the bigger picture and make sure that when we have got a framework, that we've got a framework that we can utilize to make sense of the world around us and these complex realities that we find ourselves in. We've got a lot of parties asking our attention. They're competing for our sympathies one way or the other. Quran does give us that. And just by summarizing what we talked about, let's go through it to see how thorough just these few ayat have been in order for us to come to the main question of today's video, which is there a way for us to justify what Hamas did to the people of Israel when they attacked them the way they did? Let's start. We, all humans, are to take the Quran as the guide. One guide with it and its parables. We are to call people to Allah's law, not a religion made up of his name, but his law, or his deen of peace. We are to argue, debate, reason in the best way. We're to move away from cesspools of disinformation and hatred. We're not to follow the wrong people. We are to investigate a matter thoroughly before we commit to a course of action. We are to be lenient, flexible. We are to do the Hajj of the Quran, which is reasoning like Ibrahim. We are to strive, do jihad, and change the state of affairs, qital, for the deen of Allah, so that we end up in an earth that is away from fasad. Whenever we strive, whenever we do these good things, we are never to be disproportionate in power and strength, and we're never to cross the limits. Saving one, golden principle, is like saving all. When we don't know something, we are to learn before we commit either which way. We are to be just and fair, even if it's against family and against allies. or if I, in my case, against my inherent inbuilt biases. We are to give the rightful their due. We are to remain just and maintain balance and equity. We are not to create religious temples, totems, wars, rusumat, tuqus in Allah's name. We are to compete with each other to do good deeds. We are to construct structures, cycles that feed good. We are to stay away from structures, cycles that are hateful, spiteful, negative, destructive, ash-shajar al-khabitha. We are not to let the goal of perfection stop us from doing good. We are to remember Allah's sunnah, the eternal rules, the golden rules, the never-changing sunnah, which guarantees, promises positive results for those who do positive acts. So, the main question of today's video, Hamas and what they did, was that justifiable by the Quran and some of the principles that we looked at? Can I come away after all of this and say, yeah, I think there were a few things that were probably wrong, but I sympathize, I understand where they came from, and I think that's justifiable. I'll talk about this, but before I go on and we look at this question, I want to cover the other side in case there are questions now or down the track. Well, why am I not talking about the Israeli response, right? Hamas did something, but there were, as I was saying, all those reasons that led up to Hamas doing it. They just didn't do this in a vacuum. Why am I not talking about that? Or once Hamas did what they did, look at what the Israelis have done since. All this indiscriminate bombing that they're doing day in, day out, 24 hours 7, to the people of Gaza. Why am I not talking about that, right? Well, these are valid questions. On purpose, I'm ignoring all of that. Why am I ignoring all of that? Because I'm fully aware that my ingrained biases lean towards the support of the Palestinian people, and by default, all parties associated with their cause. Hamas, by default, starts up as an entity that has got my sympathy. I'm being very honest here. And I think I speak for a lot of Pakistanis, a lot of Muslims, a lot of Arabs, that this is how we start out with. This is our starting position. In the Quran, per the Quran, we have no sacred cows. And as we just saw before, we are to start with family first. Hence, I am talking just about the Hamas. These principles that we just talked about can be applied on not just Hamas, but the Israeli reaction after, the Israeli and the dynamics between the two that led up to this incident, the role of other countries, those actors that are staying behind the scenes. We can apply them on all of them, and we should. But to keep things really simple and to make sure we're not tackling something that's too hard to tackle or to pick up on, I mean, raise a focus here and saying, let's start with family, let's start with home, let's start with people that we understand and sympathize with the most, and see what we find when we apply the Quranic principles. So, was Hamas's attacks on Israel justifiable? In my opinion, no. They were unjustifiable. Why? They crossed the limits. They attacked non-combatants like children, older people, women, other civilians. They claimed, and again, it's not their fault, and it's something we can talk about, but they claimed what they did by deriving false religious legitimacy, by pointing to a certain sacred mosque that the Quran doesn't talk about, a certain promised land, sanctity of certain people, etc. It is a sultan, it is an authority that is not given sanction by Allah. What they did was fueled by anti-Zionist propaganda that was not founded on ilm or facts. There was no qisas. They were standing on an asas, a foundation that was not grounded on purely on facts. Instead, it was driven by emotion, fear. Again, it's justifiable or not, we can talk about. But I argue it was based on grounding that was not firm. It was not based on one taking a step back, looking at the matter thoroughly, and then looking at from a Quranic perspective, how they should tackle this particular problem. They misappropriated Islamic terms like jihad, qital, Quran for a political cause. Justifiable, not the topic of today's discussion. What is ironic is that by doing this, they spread more fasad on the land instead of containing it. If the objective was that by doing terrorism, they can reduce terrorism on their land, they got exactly the opposite. So by not doing qasas, by jumping in, by being rash, by being short-sighted, they ended up helping the agenda of the oppressors working behind the scenes. So what have they done? They have fueled the ash-shajara al-khabitha, the negative cycle of hate, the one that we were meant to break. We were meant to adhere and go to ash-shajara al-tayyiba. We are far away from it. Instead, we are on the completely different spectrum by them forcing the whole narrative on lines that they wanted. And as a result of that, and this is the most ironic thing, Allah's sunnah and his laws, as we talked about in the last few slides, are crystal clear. It's not a secret as to how one gets out of a state of destitution, or if you're a people, you're being oppressed, how do you get out of it? How do you gain superiority? How do you become powerful in the world? How do you gain dominance? How do you gain back your lands, etc.? Quran is clear. It is not a secret. But by doing what they've done, they have stopped the people, their people, from adhering to Allah's sunnah. As in, to gain freedom and prosperity, instead of doing khairat, what the people were doing, or gaining knowledge, or learning to argue with logic, these short-sighted, hateful attacks have completely derailed the agenda and stopped their people from actually proceeding in the right direction. So looking at all of that and the principles that we talked about, in my understanding, what they have done is completely, Quranically speaking, unjustifiable. Now, I've said what I've said, and I know some people might not like it, like what I'm saying today. I'm looking at the comments, or some people will hate me for what I've talked about down the future, and they will say, well, there are some justifications for Hamas. Surely, Musa, you can't ignore them, right? They did. They were pushed. They had no other option. You know, you can only push a people or a certain group or a certain person or man only so much before they burst. And I would say, yeah, I kind of understand where you're coming from. But let's, again, take a step back, right? Are we saying, the question is not what he or they did, is that justification or not, or can I kind of empathize with this or not? What we're saying is, are there Quranically sanctioned lessons we can derive from the attack? And I'm saying that is not the case. Quranically speaking, they did what they did, not in accordance with what the Quran said. We can have different perspectives that we can judge this situation by. We can apply different theories of political philosophy. We can look at it from a sociological perspective. We can apply, we've got a lot of angles that we can apply, right? But I'm being very precise. Quranically speaking, a short-term goal is not what they did is not matching up with what the Quran expects for people who are doing a struggle. So to come back to this question, well, what about the justifications for Hamas? Surely there are some. Even the Quran offers them. Well, in my opinion, if we were to try and grab one ayah or the other ayah in isolation and try and twist the meaning, as ISIS, for example, did do, I think that would be twisting the Quran's overall message. The Quran's overall message, as we just looked at some of these ayat, is completely different to what some people might try and justify, basing the wrong interpretation of the Quranic ayat, deriving legitimacy from second-hand, third-hand literature that has got nothing to do with what Nabi Muhammad taught. To summarize, a terrible act, which is what that act was from a Quranic perspective, even if the intention was noble, right? An act was terrible, but the underlying intention was noble, or you can kind of justify it, understand it. I agree, you can empathize with it to a certain extent, but that is not promoted. That is not acceptable. That is not justifiable. That is not something we can ever say that the Quran condones, the Quran promotes, or the Quran says we should take as a standard. That, I think, is something that I'd like to think people, ulul albab, people who taqilun, people who use their minds, will agree on. Well, someone might say once more, well, what about the Israeli response, right? What they did before, what they're doing right now, what they'll do tomorrow. If they do their ground invasion, which is looking likely, they're going to cause terrible, disproportionately higher harm than what Hamas did. Well, I'm going to let you apply the Quranic principles we talked about just before and let you share those results on the comments down the track. I don't think there's anything, I know what the answer will be. But as I said before, charity begins at home. Fair criticism should also begin at home. And per the Quran, we have no sacred cows. If we are to be just, if we are to be honest, we must start from home. We must look at our own people that we sympathize with and make sure that we're not using blinkers. We're not ignoring. We are seeing the wood for the trees. Where to from here? What's happened has happened. They've done what they've done. Certain things will happen. Where do we go from here? Quran, if we are to take it, is principles. If we are to trust it to guide us, it does give us guidelines on resolving these matters. We need to apply them on both sides and on ourselves as well. What do I mean by ourselves? We can't be hypocrites and say, oh, we're going to stand for the people of Palestine, even if we don't understand anything about what's going on there right now, but have our own army, have our own governments do the same thing to certain ethnic groups that we don't give a damn for. That is hypocrisy. That is not fair. We have to start and we have to be consistent. We have to apply these principles not just to one side, not just to both sides, but to everything that we deal with in our lives. We are to do thorough investigations. And I think as a result of that, we should all take a step back per the Quranic guideline and say, there are designers of this war that we are seeing in here. What we see, these people coming out, these young men sacrificing themselves, killing lots and lots and lots of people, and then young men and women from Israel going and dying as well. What are the parties behind that? Who are the real victors? I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Those who follow me, those who know me, have talked to me. I'm not one of those. But this is a simple fact. There are parties, there are people behind this who do benefit. What do they get out of this? Where are they in this conversation? Why aren't we, why is there no narrative that critiques their actions and their machinations that have led us to that? That is what we should be looking at. But more importantly, I think we should acknowledge that Allah's Sunnah never changes. We should really believe that. We should believe that. We saw an ayah. The way to be dominant is to become mu'mineen, not one who goes up and down certain times of day towards a certain direction or hit stones with stones. But if we are to become mu'mineen, if we are to become that title holder, whoever that title holder is, he is, and there are those who have superiority. And they, over time, do become the dominant group of the world. That is a sunnah of Allah. For Palestinian people to rise, they have to have them take charge of the future. They have to choose a Quranic way of struggle, which does mean taking a step back from these rash and sometimes understandable reactions, taking a step back, looking at the bigger whole, applying the Quran, and making sure that the framework that they come up with towards getting to their future matches and adheres to what Allah guarantees will get them there. Anything else, well, we'll never get anything except for more bloodshed. My last slide for the day, and this is my parting thought. If you are an Israeli who's listening in right now, or will listen to it tomorrow, or as I was saying before, you're a Christian who is sympathizing with the Zionists, or you're Hindu, for whatever reason you don't like the Muslims, you don't have to be a believer in the Quran. But I'd like to ask you a question, a little favor, a little exercise. Take these principles that the Quran offers, that we just talked about, the non-religious, that won't make you anything, you stay whatever religion you want to be. Take these principles, apply them on the Israeli position that I did not talk about. And then hand on heart, I don't know you, you don't know me. Even if it's in your mind, hand on heart, be honest to yourself. Can you justify them as well? Don't just pick one side blindly, because that's your side. Be honest, be just. Apply those principles consistently. And remember, Allah's Sunnah, as we've been saying over and over, does not change. Israel, the US, and all these other nations will fade away one day. The borders will change. The supremacy will go down. There will be wars. The names of these countries will change. They'll be wiped off the map at a certain point. That is a given. That will happen. We, though, have a choice to decide what kind of a world we leave behind for our children. I have to make that choice for my children. You have to make the choice for your children. With that, I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum to everybody who has been listening to me. Until the next time, peace.